Hey everyone! So one question that I've been getting a couple times lately actually is how do you study for finals? And that's a really good question because finals are not easy, whether they're in nursing school or finals in general. It's always kind of one of those times that you feel like tearing your hair out and your emotions get the best of you and you just want to wind up on the floor in the fetal position in tears. So this video is kind of just to show you how I study for finals, as well as how I'm studying for my finals that I'm going into in 2 weeks. My school is on a quarter schedule, and I know each school is different. Some schools are semesters, some schools are quarters, but being on a quarter, we have 11 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 11 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So we have 18 weeks of material crammed into 11 weeks. And it's hard. It's hard. Nursing school is hard no matter if you're on quarters or semesters. So I'm just going to give you some of the tips and ideas that I use for studying for finals that you can also apply to studying for exams in general, not just finals, because really for me I'm always kind of preparing for finals. And I think that's smart and it works best because then you're not waiting to the last minute. You're not, trying to cram everything the week before. So this week, I've even started studying hardcore for finals and preparing. The first thing I'm going to talk about is highlighting in your notes. I use highlighters, obviously, to highlight information, and I should have put this out before the video, but I didn't, so bear with me. But anyhow, I use highlighters, and the one thing you want to remember with highlighting, especially in nursing school, is that you can get to the point where you're highlighting every single word in your textbook or every single word in your notes that the teachers give out, because it's all important information, and it can just get overwhelming and stressful when you go back to study. So just remember that when you're highlighting throughout the year, to highlight the bare minimum, because really all the information you get is information you're gonna need. So I will highlight like only the key points and things that sound interesting. Like if I'm reading through it and I'm thinking, oh wow, this is like a big topic. This could definitely be something that's on the test, or something, reading something, the sodium potassium pumps. Okay, that sounds like something that's super important, so I really need to dig into this and read it. And maybe there's 1 or 2 sentences in there that it's like really important that you really need to know, then I'll highlight stuff like that. But if you just highlight the important information, you're going to wind up highlighting every single thing. So just remember to highlight the bare minimum. Another thing is I kind of like have a code to highlighting. And how I do that is I will highlight in textbooks, any medication that is brought up, more for, when you get into the soul nursing classes, but I will highlight any medications with my blue highlighter, so that as I'm flipping through the chapter, if I'm like, oh, what was most important about warfarin that I need to know, I know to look for the blue highlighting as I'm flipping through. I'm like, nope, that's not it, nope, that's not it, to help. Another thing is I highlight diseases that are mentioned in the text and disorders in green. So hypertension, diabetes, anything that's talked about in the assignment or the readings that are diseases or disorders, I will highlight in green. And then yellow I use because it's a light color and I can go back over it, but I use this for anything that is discussed in lectures where the teacher has gone over it, because that is most likely going to be somewhere on the test, especially if it's mentioned many times by the teacher. That's probably something you want to keep in mind. So I do those in yellow, and then anything that I personally have highlighted or found helpful in my notes as I'm reading through it, or as I'm reading on my own through the lecture, I'll highlight those in orange, which I can't find my orange highlighter, but I think it died last time, so I needed to get another one. But I highlight that in orange. And really, I don't highlight much in orange because I try and stick with what the information the teacher gives, and then with the meds and diseases, everything else is really stuff you're going to need to know. But that's kind of just my highlighting system that I use as I'm going through, so that and you can do this for your own benefit too, something that you're going to remember. But it's just something I do because when I'm going through, I'm like, oh, where was that medication? I know to look at just the blue highlightings. It's not skimming through all my highlightings or the whole page if I've highlighted it. Notes. How I kind of do notes. I have tried a couple different things, and depending on what you're doing, everyone's different. So some things might work for some people, some ways, like we said, it's just not going to work. I use note cards, index cards. I use both the ones that are plain on both sides, and there's some that are plain on one side and lined on the other. It just depends what I'm making note cards for. But I like to do note cards, and when I do note cards for mainly for kind of drug information, medicines, medication. I'll put the name on one side and then what it is or diseases. I only make note cards for knowledge information, so keywords or definition or medications. I try to limit my note cards to that. Because if you do everything, it kind of can be overwhelming. So I make my flashcards, I guess you could say, or note cards, for just that knowledge-based information. And everything else I kind of will either write down on a piece of paper, separate piece of paper, or type it up, or write in my book. So I do note cards. There's paper notes that you can do that are kind of like this, where you put the main topic on one side, and then you have the meaty information here, the stuff that you really need to know. And I'll make those so that I can go through and just read, like, this is what you need to know about this, and this is the parts of it. Just kind of helping keep it organized, easy to look at. Also because when I do it like this, I can fold it later on when I'm ready to test myself on this information. And I did not fold this in a straight line, but I'll fold it and then I'll be like, okay, read it off, the word. So the 11 organ systems on one side, and then on the other side I have those, so I'm not looking at it, but I have them to reference, so I can go through and say integumentary, muscular, nervous, lymphatic, and go through and make sure I get all of them, and then I can look and be like, okay, yeah, I did it. I got that one, and I'll put a little check. So I've got that. I don't really need to keep studying information I have. I'll review it later, but I really need to find what I'm lacking in and work on that. So paper notes like that are one way that I study. There's also, I put notes in the margins of my book as we're going through lecture, and there's also online sources like Quizlet, or there's an app I have on my phone too, Study Blue. If have kind of like a lighter week, and rather than writing note cards out, because sometimes that is hard and takes up a lot of time, and again, that's why I kind of just stick with the knowledgeable information that I'm going to make note cards with, I will go on to those websites, especially Study Blue. You can log on, it's free, create an account, make flashcards online, and then you can print them off, and it'll print off kind of like this, words on one side and you can have definitions on the other, however you want to do it. But there's also games on there, and you can get a free app, which I have on my phone. The app looks like this here, and it's just very beneficial for studying, and you can make different flashcards, you can play games using the words, but you can also access that on the computer and on your phone. So if I'm out, somewhere, waiting. I'm at a doctor's appointment, I'm waiting on a friend to show up for lunch, or waiting to meet my family and they haven't showed up yet, I can just pull up my phone and I can be studying instead of sitting there twiddling my thumbs waiting for 15 minutes for them to show up. I'm using my time wisely and still able to study the information that I have. So those are two great, you can also pull from other people. So you can type in, say you're studying for anatomy and physiology, you can type in and search anatomy and physiology and look at cards or note cards that other people have found. So if I have left my note cards at home and I'm sitting there and, you know, whoever I'm meeting says, I'm going to be another 15-20 minutes, rather than just sitting there and wasting 15 or 20 minutes looking on Facebook, searching my phone, whatever, I can get on Study Blue and search for anatomy and physiology flashcards and look at some of the flashcards that other people have made and quiz myself that way. Which is also really good because you're seeing other information, you're seeing it worded differently so that you're not memorizing so much a specific phrase, but you're really understanding the broad, full concept of whatever you're studying. And that has been super helpful because sometimes you get into the fact where it's like, oh, I know this word for word, word for word. But chances are the tests and exams and quizzes aren't going to look like the notes you took. So it's just good at practicing and seeing that information and reviewing it in a different format. Let's see, what was I going to studying. I told you about the flashcards. Actually, let me show you. Here's my anatomy and physiology book that we used for class. Let me just show you kind of, I think I used a different system when I did this for highlighting and stuff, but if your book looks like this, these are going to be my tips for studying how I study. If your book looks like this, I did not highlight a lot of information. I highlighted just what I thought was important, none of them being vocabulary words. So this is talking about the lymphatic system, and I said that highlighted that fluids must be returned to the cardiovascular system to maintain normal blood volume. It permits interstitial fluid to flow into them but not out. Just stuff like that it's like, okay, I need to kind of remember that, but it's not vocab. You know, I save the vocab or whatever for flashcards or note cards or whatever. But one way that I will study is I will read the assignments and make my notes, and then when I'm sitting in lecture, I will take my book with me. And what I've found is that PowerPoints usually will follow your book. They're the same diagrams, the same information, it's all right out of your book. So I will just, rather than spending the time to print off a bunch of PowerPoint slides and notes and whatever, I will just take my book in with me and follow along with the teacher in class, because a lot of that information is pulled right from the book and it's familiar because I've already read it. So I will, there's something that the professor says, I'm like, oh, I don't really remember reading too much about that, I will either use my handy dandy little Post-it notes that I have, and I usually will take bigger ones with me to lecture, and I will use those to write down what he's saying or what she's saying and put it right in the chapter that he or she is covering, just to go back later and review or try and find it specifically in the book. But I also will make notes right here in the margin section and write it just right there, because then I'm not having papers that I'm trying to not lose that's got the same information. I'm not wasting time. But for studying for lectures, usually in the back of your book, in the back of each chapter, there are, let me see if I can find it. Here. There are little self-quizzes that they'll have, and I don't know if you can see this, but see how they ask questions and there's answers? Usually you'll find the answers in the back of the book. When I'm studying for exams or quizzes, I will go and do those questions and read them and fill them out, because some teachers take questions from their test right from these. I had one teacher that nobody in the class figured this out. This is how I studied, but he gave us our anatomy and physiology quizzes. They were these quizzes right from the back of the book. Word for word, question for question, they were them, and people were not getting them right, and he told us at the very end of class. And I hadn't said anything really to anyone because I didn't know anyone in that class. But our questions from the quiz were right from those questions in the back of each chapter. So I make sure I do those questions when I'm studying for an exam. They have like the critical thinking ones, but that's something that I take the time, and that's part of my studying habits, is to answer the questions in those. And some teachers give study guides. Do the study guides. It'll help because a lot of the information that they're going to give you in the study guides is information they want you to know, and it's kind of like, hey, you might see this on the test. Know this information. So that's something that I do as well, those questions, those exams, and then reviewing kind of the summaries that they give. This book gives a summary on each different section. There's a summary for 1.1, 17.1. So I'll review those as well in the back of the book. Breaking it down into during lecture, before lecture, and after lecture. Oh, real quick, I forgot this. I got these for, they're flashcards for anatomy and physiology. If you're taking anatomy and physiology, I got these off Amazon. It was just, I think it wasn't that expensive. It was like $20 for our 335 flashcards, and I really, really liked these for anatomy 1 and 2. It breaks it down into each section of the body systems. So there's cells and tissues and tegumentary, skeletal, muscular, nervous, endocrine, vascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproduction, and birth and pregnancy. But these were super helpful for studying. Let me see if I can pull these out here. Maybe. They're a little tight. They're in there a little tight. Well, here's one. I liked it because, first of all, the front of it has pictures on it, and they're labeled A, B, C, or D. And you kind of can just quiz yourself, and then it has the answers on the back. So that you know each part of, this is the epidermis, this is the dermis. You know everything about it. Let me see if I can get a section out here because they're so... Here, cells and tissue. So for this one, it has type. You have to say type and location of it. But this is the cells and tissue, and you just are naming the parts of it. And on the back, it tells you what part is what. It gives you the answers. And I thought these were just, they weren't that expensive. They were easy to follow along with. They helped in studying, just giving a little bit of information that I hadn't seen before. I found these very helpful. So, Amazon. It's by Scientific Publishing, and it's Anatomy and Physiology flashcards. There's $27-ish. So that I found helpful. Okay, back to studying, kind of. During lecture, I follow along in the book. I highlight the teacher's notes in yellow. I use notes in the textbook and in the margins, like things that the teacher says that I want to look back and talk about. And I usually do not print off PowerPoints or teacher notes because it is just repetitive information. It's wasting paper and the ink that I'm using to print it out because it's not cheap. So I'll just take the book, like I said, and I will write margins. I will write it on sticky notes and put the sticky notes right on that page. And then, if need be, I'll go online and look through those lectures again and make sure I've just really got a firm foundation on all of that information. Before lectures, I like to read what is assigned for that week. So like this class, if we were talking about the integumentary, and I had lecture on Wednesday, before I went to lecture on Wednesday, I would read the chapter being discussed beforehand so that as he was talking about it in lecture, I already had kind of a small grasp of that information in my head on what was going to be discussed. I knew the basics, I was familiar with it. Maybe I didn't know it word for word, but I was at least familiar with it, so it wasn't, anything being presented wasn't particularly new, and it was less overwhelming. I would read the readings and make any flashcards that I felt would be necessary if I had time. I budgeted my time, which I talked about in time management and organization video, but I would make any of the flashcards that I wanted to make beforehand that I knew I wanted to study with, and I had a folder that I kept instead of a big binder with all the important handouts, the syllabi for that each class, any important information that the teacher handed out, professor handed out, and I just kept that all together in one place since I didn't need a big binder because I wasn't printing out 80 pages of PowerPoints or lecture notes, and it was all just in one place and easier to control and keep organized. Let's see. After lectures, I would make sure that I reread the chapters, reread all my notes, all the lecture notes. I would go online if available and get the PowerPoints, everything that I needed just to review. And my big tips for studying for finals, like these are all things I do throughout the semester, but when I'm seriously buckling down to study for finals, if I have followed all these and I've kept up with this, usually finals week when I'm studying and I'm not cramming so much because I've already got a really good grasp because I've been reviewing. Do not wait till the last minute to study for finals because it will stress you out. It just is not good. I start studying after the next test. So every day I read some part of each lecture. If we had a test, say we had a test on Thursday, Friday I would come home or I would start studying, I would read the information, start practicing, getting ready for the next test. Test number 2 is in 3 weeks. Every day I was reading some kind of information, either from a previous exam, trying to keep up, reading the material given, getting ahead a little bit so that I knew what was coming in the next lecture, just keeping ahead with note cards. I was reviewing note cards. On a day that I had lecture, say I had the lecture Tuesday night, and were presented new information. I've read the information beforehand. I have kind of done my own notes along with it, just brief notes. I've gone now and sat through the lecture, and I've heard the teacher discuss. I will come home that night of lecture and review that information again, just to make sure there wasn't anything I missed, to make sure I heard everything that the professor or teacher was saying, and getting it in my brain, because it's new information and I want it in there so that it's processing and it has time to process, so that tomorrow when I go through and skim my notes again, or I go through and review, it's already in there and I kind of have a grasp so that I'm growing and learning off of that rather than, getting new information, next day getting new information, next day doing nothing really but doing assignments, and then coming to the exam, in 3 days, and then cramming and trying to review everything you learned right after the last exam that's new to this information. So I'm constantly in free time reading or rereading flashcards, looking at old previous exam notes, keeping those current in my mind, keeping myself up to date and refreshed on that information. And a lot of times that information will help you with what you're studying now, or it'll even help in preparation for your finals. So really, my finals preparation is kind of a semester or quarter-long process because I'm always working towards studying for finals. I'm always making sure that I'm reviewing all the information, I'm keeping it current and fresh in my mind so that when finals come, yes, it's finals week and it's stressful, but I'm not quite as stressed out about it because I've been reviewing the information, and if there's anything that's been foggy or unclear up till then, I have gone over it and I've figured out what it is. I've sat down and really dug in and like, okay, what am I missing here? What process do I need to get down so that I am prepared for this exam, I'm prepared for the finals, and I can keep going, and it's just review rather than learning new information, or learning new information, forgetting it, studying for the new test, and then having to go back and relearn information for the final, because it's just not beneficial to you. It's not using your time wisely. So really that's what I do to study. I just am constantly reviewing information, constantly rereading my notes, rereading flashcards, going through PowerPoints, lectures, just to keep current, because I've just found that works so well in just keeping it fresh in your mind and relieving stress when it comes to finals. So that's how I study for tests and finals, and how throughout I just try and keep a positive attitude and believe in myself that I can do this. You guys can do it too. I believe in you. You just gotta figure out what system works best for you and kind of stick to that. So I think that's it. I don't know if you guys are interested, I have here like my structure and function, because like I said, my finals are in 2 weeks, and so I've already started preparing. I wrote this time my notes down on papers like this, because its structure and function is very similar to A and P. It's a lot of the same information. So then I would just write new information on here. I drew a couple diagrams that were like in the book, just to prepare. This class was online, so I never went into lecture, but I would read the reading before I went into lecture. As he was lecturing, I would add here in the margins, add little notes that he said, that he kept repeating, so it's like, okay, he's repeated this 3 times, I'm gonna need to know this information. Like, this is gonna show up on our exam, or on the final when we take it. It's obviously important. So I would write those down in the margins. Especially specific wordings, like if he overpronunciated things, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be important information. Like, I feel like we're gonna need this. So that's how I just studied. I would write the notes in the margins as he went over the lectures, and then after lecture that night, right before I went to bed or something, I would just go over and reread through my notes from the readings, from his lectures, from whatever I had that was current, and then I would, sometimes if there wasn't a lot of information for that, I would read previous information as well, just to keep it fresh, just to help in understanding. And if there wasn't anything I knew that the next day, I really should probably look at this more, clear it up. But that's how I study. That's what has seemed to work best for me. Like I've said, everyone's different. No one functions the same way. Some things are good for some people and not for others. But that's how I do it, and it just relieves stress. Usually finals week, I'm not quite as stressed because I know most of the information. There are just maybe a couple topics that I go over again to make sure I really have nailed down before the exam. And then I go into the exam with food in my stomach, but with a clear conscience of, I did the best that I could. I studied as much as I can. Yes, I might be shooting for a solid A, 100 or a 99, but if I come out with a 92, I still did the best that I can, and I know that I worked as hard as I could, and I prepared myself, and I did everything that I could, and it just helps, because then it's not like I shouldn't have crammed, I got a 92 because I was cramming, or I got a 60 or whatever. I just feel more prepared and more confident in myself because I know that I've used my time wisely. I've done everything I could. I've taken every, possible step, studied as much as I could, and I feel confident even afterwards. Even if I didn't do quite as well as I would have hoped, I still know I did the best that I could, and I used my time wisely. And most times, it's your head that gets to you, and so being able to say that and saying it out loud sometimes will help as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped or gave you some ideas on how you can study for finals or for exams or quizzes or anything like that. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will look forward to reading those and getting any other suggestions that you guys have. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys have a good finals week, or if you're just starting classes, hope your classes are going really well, and I'll talk to you guys later.